Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me in the Locker Room for the third episode in the Conversation with Alan series on January 27th, 2021, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I started Conversations with Alan to have an open dialogue about the rise of hate and anti-Semitism in the United States, with hopes that it leads to conversations that make us all think about our own place in history and what we can do to change course. When I watched the footage from the rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017, and then watched the events unfold during the Capitol insurrection on January 6th of this year, where protesters and those marching the Capitol were wearing t-shirts with the words Camp Auschwitz and 6 million were not enough blazoned across their front of their t-shirts, my heart stopped, and I knew that I needed to speak up now and use my voice. If you read the incredible book, Something Beautiful Happened, written by Yvette Mindy Corporon, the cousin of my guest tonight, or watched the first episode of Conversations with Alan, you may have heard about my next guest and her story. Mindy Corporon is an entrepreneur, a thought leader, and about to become a first-time author. Mindy was a single mother dealing with divorce and had experienced a life-threatening illness. She was in the middle of raising her talented boys, Reet and Lucas, when tragedy struck her family. On April 13th, 2014, Mindy's father, Dr. William Corporon, and oldest son, Reet, were murdered by a white supremacist intent on killing Jews. Dr. Corporon was taking his grandson to the Jewish Community Center in Overland Park, Kansas, so Reet could audition for KC Superstar, a local American Idol contest, when a white supremacist intent on wanting to know what it felt like to kill Jews killed 3 innocent, non-Jewish people. In that one moment, Mindy's life purpose changed from guiding people financially to helping people around the world learn about their differences and discover our commonalities. With incredible compassion and forgiveness, Mindy continues to open her heart, sharing the experience of loss as a daughter and a mother, a wife, and coworker. Today, she works with and motivates people to overcome life's challenges, one day at a time. Please watch this video to hear Mindy's story in her own words.
I think when you're out of your comfort zone, you're given the opportunity to have your voice. And when you're put in a situation where you're uncomfortable, you can either clam up and say absolutely nothing, or you can find your voice and you can say, this is who I am. And I think I'm finding my voice. On April 12th, 2014, we were a family of 4 and everything was fantastic. Life was great. And on April 13th, my dad and son were murdered. They were murdered because somebody thought that they were Jewish. And I found them in the parking lot. I happened to arrive before the ambulance and before the police. So I had this unusual experience. I heard the words, "Your father's in heaven, go find Reet." And then I walked around the truck and I found my son in the arms of 2 men. And when they asked me who I was, I said, that's my father and he's in heaven. And I pointed to where my dad was. And then I said, this is my son. Is he still living? And then when we got to the hospital, it didn't take them very long to put us in that small room that you probably don't ever want to have to go into. And they told the group of us who had then gathered that the young man who was brought in from the headshot wound did not survive. We lost his heartbeat in the ambulance. Everyone in the room erupted, rightly so, with screams and cries and just complete disbelief. And I felt like someone put a warm blanket over me. And someone said, there's a vigil that's going to happen tonight. And I felt my heart leap. And it just said, you have to be there. You have to tell everyone that something good will come from this. My intent was to let people know that we were living life and that we will live life again, and that we won't let the evil overcome us. So when the seed was planted that I wanted love to overcome evil. Other people listened, which was fantastic because I just kept moving forward every time I thought I was supposed to move forward in a specific direction. Thus started the Faith Always Wins Foundation, and then that's how 7 Days got started. So my whole world had moved into an interfaith world by the end of 2014. And we did our first 7 days of kindness, and it was all about kindness. But really what my mission was to bring God's people together, bring people of all faiths together for understanding and dialogue so that we could have a more bountiful world, a plentiful world, a world filled of love and much less evil. And my husband told me when I started speaking about that, he said, Mindy, for thousands and thousands of years, millions of people have died because of their faith. Why do you think you're going to make a difference? And I said, because God asked me to. Because my heart does not hurt when I do what I'm supposed to do. We're only on this earth for a very short amount of time, and I can attest to that. Reet was only 14. The work that I do with the Faith Always Wins Foundation and through the activities of 7 Days Make a Ripple Change the World are focused on overcoming evil with acts of kindness, overcoming evil with understanding. There's always going to be evil in the world, and evil can be very loud. My objective is to have good and love and hope and faith much louder than that, because the good is always better.
It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Mindy Corporon to the Locher Room. Mindy, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I will say, I spoke of this in the intro in the shows that I've done for Conversations with Alan. Charlottesville was my inspiration for doing this. And I had mentioned that to you, that, my idea was one show to talk about hate and to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism. And you said simple words to me, why do one show? And it resonated. And I'm thrilled that you were my third guest. We talked about this at the end of 2020. So I want to say thank you, because I think it's so important. I believe in what you're doing in Reet and your dad's honor. So I want to start off. Can you talk about Reet and tell us what Reet was like?
Yes, I love talking about Reet. Yes, I love talking about him. He was precious. He was really smart. That's for sure. He was very, very smart, and he was talented. He wasn't just smart. He actually had an extremely high IQ, and he was one of those kids that would want to, play video games and be inside, and you wouldn't have thought that somebody that had that inclination, that he would also like being outdoors. And he absolutely loved Boy Scouts. We were very surprised. We were happy, but we were surprised that he crossed over from Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts and enjoyed camping, and he enjoyed the challenges. He was working on his Eagle Scout. So he did not receive his Eagle Scout while he was living. He was a Life Scout at the time of his death, and he received an Eagle Scout Spirit of the Eagle Award after his death. So he was a musician. He played the violin. He was in theater. He was finding himself enjoying, musical theater and productions and dance. And he was a very good young man. He was also normal. He also did normal teenage, normal kid things and teenage things. Like I'm going to tell on him. I tell this in the book that I just finished. He stole out of, he took Lynn's, Lynn is his stepdad. He took Lynn's credit card without our permission and was purchasing something from, like some gaming thing. And so, he did normal things like that too. I mean, he was a normal boy. He had lots of friends. He had more friends than we realized at school. And when I started receiving cards from parents who said that their children were beside themselves because of his death, because of who he was, and that they couldn't believe that hate could take someone like him. Those were things that were so powerful to me. So he was a wonderful, bright light, and still is a bright light in our lives.
And Dr. Corporon?
Yes. So my dad was very intelligent as well and loved theater. He was a physician. He went to the University of Oklahoma Medical School. He went to Phillips University in Enid, Oklahoma, and it doesn't exist any longer. And then he went to the University of Oklahoma Medical School. Hard worker, lots of long hours, early mornings, used to deliver babies at the crack of dawn, or whenever that baby was coming, he would have to leave the house and go deliver a baby. I remember those days when I was in elementary school and he would leave the house. We lived on some acreage when I was in high school, and he loved gardening and he loved to swim. He taught me and my two brothers how to swim. And then I ended up just really loving swimming and swimming laps. And he would swim a mile every day that he could. So he would either find a gym or swim in the pool that we had. When they were living in Kansas, in Overland Park, Kansas, he and I went to the same gym. And he would get there before I would. And he would be almost finished swimming when I would get in the pool. And then we would be swimming laps together for a period of time. Funny, dirty jokes. He could always tell.
That's the best.
a good, funny, raunchy joke. He, so had a great laugh, a great belly laugh. A very, very good, wonderful, loving husband to my mom, and a fantastic dad. But he also said he was a much better grandfather than he was a dad, because I think a lot of people say that because once you're a grandparent, you tend to have a little bit more time, tend to be a little bit more relaxed. Mm-hmm. So he was a wonderful grandfather. His oldest grandson is Travis, and then Reet was the next grandson, and then my second son, Lucas, and then he's got more grandkids. So a great dad and a great granddad.
Such a loss on both. You actually said that your dad saved your life by losing his. Can you share what you meant by that?
Yes, I was supposed to drive Reet. I would have been driving Reet to the Jewish Community Center that day. And the night before, the day before, on April 12th, we were all at our kitchen table. And it was, when I say we, it was myself and Reet and Lucas, and then my husband, Lynn, who's Reet's stepdad and Lucas's biological dad. And my mom and dad were there, and we were having a dinner. And Lynn and I had been out of town for several days the week prior on our wedding anniversary. And mom and dad had taken care of the boys, which was totally normal in our life. And we were starting to plan for the next day because it was a really big audition for Reed. He had already auditioned for 2 other performing arts opportunities. He had already made both of those. He had gotten accepted to be in the summer play Tom Sawyer at a musical theater in Kansas City. And then he also had gotten accepted to a youth program through what we call Starlight Theater. He was really just rising to the top right then and finding himself. And this was his 3rd audition. So we were discussing that. I was saying, I'm going to take Reed to the audition. I was just expecting, I had scheduled it. I figured I would take him. And evidently Lucas had a little sad face. Reed had an audition and Lucas had a lacrosse game at about the same time. They always, scheduling, they had this on Sunday at the same time. And Reed saw Lucas's face, and Reed turned to me and he said, Mom, I think you should go to Lucas's lacrosse game because you missed 2 lacrosse games when you were out of town. So, mom guilt. I'm like, oh, I missed 2 lacrosse games while we were out of town. But I really wanted to take Reed to this audition because I'd be able to take him, I'd be able to sit in the audience, and I just wanted to be part of this so much. And I looked at Lucas and I could tell he thought I should go to the lacrosse game too. So I'm like, okay. And then I asked my mom to take Reed, and she couldn't. And so my dad was available, and my dad drove Reed. And, if dad had not been available, if he had said, I already have plans, or I'm going to do this, or I'm not available, I would have abandoned Lucas's lacrosse game, and I would have driven Reed, and I would have pulled into the parking lot in probably the same place where my dad parked.
I know that your family faith is really important. I assume, but I'll ask, your mom and dad taught you that? Is that where it comes from for you?
Yes. I don't want to say yes and no, because that's not true. I want to say yes, but I will say actually, as even more powerfully, are from both of my grandparents. So my dad's father, my paternal grandfather, was a pastor in the church. And then his wife was a teacher. So that was my Peepaw and my Meemaw. And those are my dad's parents. And I knew them really well when they were in Enid, Oklahoma. And so he was a pastor. And then on my mom's side, my mother and granddaddy, he wasn't a pastor, but they were always at the Methodist church. I mean, every single time we went to Ponca City, Oklahoma to see them, and we would be there over a weekend, a holiday, and a Sunday. We were always at church with them. And my grandmother, Mothy, taught me about communion. And so we went to, she had responsibilities for communion, evidently 1 week or so when I was staying with them. And I remember going into the church basement and her telling me all about communion. And of course, I'd seen it as a child, and I'd probably had partaken in communion. But to watch her prepare it and to hear her discuss why do Christians take communion, and she went through the whole thing. And I remember, how small I felt in the room and how tall the cabinet was and the light coming in. It was just this powerful moment that I remember being with her. So those things filtered into my life. We attended church every Sunday. We were in Sunday school. We were in youth group. My mom was the choir director. And frequently, when the pastor would be gone, my dad would take the pulpit, and my dad would give a sermon. And to us, it was just, that's what dad does. He was a leader in the church, and there were other people on occasion that would rotate if the pastor needed a break or was on sabbatical or whatever the pastor was doing. So yes, so all of them, raised me in that. And I talk about this in the book, that I didn't know anyone that wasn't Christian growing up. I didn't understand that there were other faiths. I didn't know anyone Jewish. I didn't understand that there were other faiths because I was so engulfed in Christianity when I was growing up. But yes, that's where faith came from for me.
But it is interesting because I grew up Jewish and knew I was Jewish, but I think I grew up in a much more a non-Jewish community than a Jewish community. So for me, I didn't always share what I was. I think I felt, and that could be my parents' Holocaust story that kept me hiding that story. But it's interesting when when you're not exposed to those things, or you're not around people like yourself in some way. For me,
my mom has told me she was concerned when I was telling people that I didn't know Jewish people. She said to me, this was after the murders, and I was speaking publicly about how I was raised and what I knew, what I remembered. And she said, we knew Jewish people in Oklahoma City. And I said, Mom, I was 3 when we were in Oklahoma City. So I think I know that my parents were open to people of other faiths and would have been in conversation with them. But I was raised in a town of 5,000 people, and you were Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Church of Christ, or Catholic, or church. Right. There wasn't a synagogue and there wasn't a mosque, and so that's just what I knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you speak to what you know. And speaking of speaking, the night this happened, I don't know how you did it, but you had heard that teenagers were gathering for a prayer vigil nearby. And as you were listening to them, and we showed in the video, you decided to get up and speak. Where did you find the courage to do that? And do you remember even what you said?
I only remember what I said because I listened to it So here's what happened, Alan. I found my dad and deceased. I found my dad dead in the parking lot at the Jewish community campus. Like I walked and ran to him, and while I was standing there, only for seconds, I heard the words, "Your Father's in heaven, go find Reed." It was as clear as day. It was powerful. There was no one around me. And then I found Reed, and then subsequently a lot happened, and then Reed lost his life in the ambulance. And I felt a pain that parents who lose children, I know, understand. And it is a pain that you don't ever want to feel. But yes, and then when I was at my mother's home, just a little bit later, several hours later, I had a conversation with Pastor Adam Hamilton, who was our pastor at the time and is now. And he came in, and I kind of cornered him and said, "I feel like I'm a crazy person because I've heard this a few times today." And he said to me something that I really didn't want to hear at the time. I wasn't happy with what he said to me, but he said, "Keep listening." He said, you're very raw right now. He said, "I don't even know what you're feeling right now, but just keep listening, because I think you're being led." And I felt like I was being led, but I was a little afraid of what I was being led to or by or anything. And so as I left that conversation with him, I heard people saying there was going to be a vigil. And I just had to be there. Now, let me take you back to when I was 16 years old. A really dear friend of mine was killed in a car wreck, and I was devastated. And fast forward a month after his death, and I asked a pastor, an interim pastor at our church, I said, "Can you tell me why this happened?" And I knew that it was a truck, and I knew all that, but like, he just was this, to me, this shining light, and he was so important in my life and our family's life. And he said, "It's God's will." And I just thought, well, I don't want to know a God like that if it's God's will, because I took it very literally that God wanted Kyle dead. And so now I hear there's a student vigil. And Alan, I wanted to tell those kids that God didn't kill my dad and Reed. I didn't want to derail their lives with like what I had been derailed with. I wanted them to grieve, but I wanted them to be able to move forward in their life more quickly than I did. And so I thought it was going to be a student vigil, and I showed up, and there were people from all walks of life, and I didn't know that there was news media. When I went, I was very much in a fog, and people were talking at the pulpit, and it wasn't even touching the level of pain I was feeling. And I thought, they're trying, but they're not saying what needs to be said. And I just said to my girlfriend, Tara, "I'm supposed to speak." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "What are you going to say?" And I said, "I don't know." And I didn't. And then I went up there, but with the intent to let them know that they needed to live their lives, because we were living our lives and we were going to live our lives again. And it sounded great. And I think it was meaningful. I know it was from my heart. And I'm glad I said it then, because I couldn't have said that in year 2 when we were taking Lucas to Research Medical Center to keep him from committing suicide. That the pain that we went through just spiraled down and out of control. But at that moment, I'm so thankful that I had that lifting and spirit from the Holy Spirit to help me help others, because then in turn, they helped our family, so it was this give and take.
Well, and like you said, you didn't realize that the television cameras were there, but I mean, that was in some ways a blessing too, because you did, your words had an impact on so many, you reached millions by speaking there, and because those cameras were there. We mentioned, that it's a neo-Nazi, a white supremacist who was on this mission, to kill Jewish people. I mean, here you are, not Jewish, I am, and you hear this, and he not only took one, he took 2 family members. How did you process that? Did you even, did you understand what that really meant, a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist at that time?
I didn't understand who had murdered them for several days. I didn't look into that. I really wanted nothing to do with the person who murdered them. I knew it had to, one, I knew it was a heinous crime. And I want to make sure and say, and it was said in the video as well, and I think you said it as well, that Terry Lamanno lost her life also. So
I didn't mention her yet, but it was in the video, and I was going to ask you. Yes, she did.
Yes. So yes. So I did lose 2 people in our family, and then a third person was murdered at the Village Shalom. So the shooter murdered Dad and murdered Reet, or shot Reet, and then shot at other people, and then drove to the Village Shalom and shot at 1 or 2 people there, and then murdered Terry Lamanno. And so I say that because I think it's so important to understand that our lives are all connected with that, and our lives are connected in some fashion, or could be more, with white supremacy. But I, at the time, said I don't want anything to do with that, and I really pushed away. And I went to really good people were murdered, and we just have to find good out of this. Like their lives aren't here, and so I have to do everything I can to help their legacies, shine and live on, because they were really good people. So I pushed that aside. My older brother Will and my younger brother Tony did a little bit more digging. Will did quite a bit more digging, and Tony, and they on occasion would kind of feed me some information about things. But none of us really tackled that or went down that path. We all, and you asked about how do we process it. It takes years. It took years. And I still, when I share our story with new people in my life, they say to me, I didn't know that still happened. They say that to me. And I said, okay, I just told you that my dad and son were murdered by a white supremacist. And of course they're looking at me and I'm white. So they're like, and they probably don't, whether they know or don't know what my faith is, they're like, how did that happen? And the point is that when rhetoric and, and people who are filled with hate, and when they're allowed to continue and nobody stops them, then they explode at some point. And he decided to explode all over our family. And that's what I explain to people, is that we can't allow hate rhetoric to continue, because some people, many people will say, oh, it doesn't hurt me. They're talking to them, or that happened in another city, or that happened, I don't know anyone. Well, I can tell you there are a lot of people in the Kansas City community now that know me, and they know that it happened. And our community is well aware that hate exists, and we have to stamp it out very quickly.
Every word of that. I mean, yeah, every word of that. The powerful moment in Yvette's book, Something Beautiful Happened, where she's explaining to her teenage son, Nico, who asked her, the Nazis are gone. And Yvette shares, how she could explain the history of how and why people hate others simply because they are of another faith, because of the mere fact that they call God by another name. And she says, we all know it makes no sense because hate is not something rational. It's not even something we can make sense of, but it is happening currently,
Yes,
still happening.
It's been happening. That our murders took place in 2014, and it has continued to happen, and it's being talked about more, which I think is good that it's being talked about more, because all of humanity needs to understand that it really does happen. And so what I thought initially, Alan, because of what the shooter said during the trial, I didn't go to the trial, but I read some excerpts of things that he said. And he talked about being raised by a dad that hated, being raised to understand this. So I took that to mean that all people who were neo-Nazis or white supremacists, that they must be raised that way. It must be from their family. For instance, you asked, where do I get my faith? And I said, oh, I get my faith from my family. So I thought, well, they must get hate from their family. But I met a gentleman named Christian Picciolini, who is a reformed white supremacist, and he's in Chicago. And I would call him a friend now, a very good friend. He's a reformed neo-Nazi white power leader from Chicago.
Wow.
And he was not raised with hate. So this is what has struck me. And when we at Faith Always Wins Foundation and our 7 days experiences, when we talk about engaging the youth and helping kids find a place, we are thinking critically about students who are lonely, who may feel less than, who can't share their voice, who are hiding because of something. We want to offer them a place in society, because Christian, his family were Italian immigrants, and he felt less than, he felt lonely, and he was in an alleyway smoking, probably a joint or a cigarette or something with a friend when he was a teenager. And just so you know, it's all written in his book. I didn't just create that. And a white power guy came up. A white power guy came up, and Christian had leadership tendencies, and they appreciated that in him, and he appreciated being wanted. He appreciated being valued by someone. He says, it wasn't that I ever hated Jews or hated Hispanics or hated anybody or blacks. He said, I just wanted to belong, and I belonged to their group, and then I got to be a leader. And so we have to consider all the different ways that as humans, we need to feel love. We need to feel loved, and we need to feel valued. And when we don't feel that, we may choose the wrong path. We're gonna choose where we do feel like we're accepted. And that's human nature. And so as adults, we should be looking at our youth and making sure that kids are not falling through the cracks. Those rough and tumble, boys and girls that just are angry and seem so angry and distraught, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're just going to go down the wrong path. Well, why don't we wrap them up in a hug? Why don't we figure out a way to give them an outlet that isn't neo-Nazi or white power or gun-toting or whatever it might be? Let's channel who they are and give them a path to kindness, and they'll just be better off for it, and the rest of society will be as well.
So, it's so interesting. It's just like you having that conversation with Chris, is his name, is that?
Christian.
It's interesting because I think, like, God, I would love to see Christian on television speaking instead of, us seeing the images of, the neo-Nazis wearing T-shirts like that, but hearing somebody who's reformed and what brought him to that dark place would be a lot better for all of us to understand, so that people aren't judging them. And, because you're right. And it's interesting too, you're talking about now, we're in a pandemic where kids are isolated too.
Easy to get hold of. Yeah, they're easy to get hold of on gaming systems. I've heard, so you can find Christian very easily. So he has 2 documentaries called Breaking Hate. He is who introduced me to Susan Bro, who is Heather Heyer's wife. So I know you're really familiar with the fact that Heather Heyer was murdered, because that was very instrumental in your wanting to speak out. And so he introduced me to Susan Bro, and he introduced me to Chris Winchuk. And both of those moms lost children to white power, to neo-Nazism. Interesting. So I know Susan really well, and I just did a podcast with her, and she told me she wanted to know who the faces were of the white supremacists. Like, she went that direction. She went down that road and really staying on that road to fight white supremacy and understand it and know it. Whereas I'm actually new to that piece of it. I went the opposite way. I just said, I don't want to know anything about those people. And I didn't understand that there were that many more of them. I did think it was like a lone wolf type thing, because he was by himself, and he thought the shooter in our instance is who I'm talking about. And I thought, he said he thought he was going to die, and that's why he did this. So I didn't understand that there were other people out there that might think like him. And so I totally went down the path of kindness. So I'm new really in the last 1.5 to 2 full years to be considering who are white supremacists and how do they function and why do they, and that really started when I met Christian and found out that he wasn't taught hate. He learned it because he was lonely and he was looking for acceptance, and he found it through a white power group.
That's so powerful. I didn't realize it was only the last year and a half for you. I thought it had been longer. I know that you and Lucas, your brothers, and a total of 12 family members stood up in court to face the man who murdered them. Was there any doubt that you would be there all for that, or was there?
Never.
Wow.
Never. I would say that my husband, Lynn, was highly concerned about having Lucas at the courthouse, but because I was going to be at the courthouse, Lucas was going to be with me, and so we were all going. We did not go to the courthouse for anything but the very ending type things. So we went for the verdict, and we went for the victim statements, which is what you're talking about. We all were able to read victim statements, and then we went for the sentencing. So we were there 3 times, and those were the only 3 times that we went to the courthouse. We stood within less than 3 feet. We were probably right at, 2.5 feet away from the man who shattered our lives.
Your Dr. Corporon and your mom are quite role models from reading about, learning about you, your brothers. Quite a family. And I'd like to share, I asked you before the show, but I'm going to read what you said in the courtroom, which to me is incredibly powerful and says a lot about who you and your family are. But in response to evil, we will show grace, kindness, and understanding. To all those of the Jewish faith, thank you for your love, prayers, and deep support of our family. We stand stronger because of you. Dad, Reet, and Terry did not die in vain. Their deaths are not for the benefit of evil, but have, from the day they were taken, been making good things happen. Do I want them back? Yes, more than my own life itself. I didn't get to choose this path, and instead of hate, I choose faith. I just think that's incredibly powerful. You said it earlier about Terry. I assume this has bonded you with Terry's family?
Yes. Yeah. So it's not fun to meet someone at the district attorney's office because you've had family members murdered, but that is how we met Jim Lomano. And but he is a dear soul. He's a dear man. He is a dentist by practice, and she was a nurse. Wow. And they had 3 children together. So they had one daughter that they had given up for adoption, and then they did keep 2 kids. They had 2 that I know more. I know Alyssa and Gian, and Jim is involved in all 3 of their lives. And they had just found their older daughter. She had just found them about 6 months before Jerry was murdered. We are close with one another, and we work with one another on, specifically in April, during the 7 days Make a Ripple Change the World experiences.
Gotcha. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about Lucas, but Lucas was 12 when this happened. How were you, you and Len and your whole family were processing this. Were you even able to help him? I don't know how.
I don't know how either, Alan. It was a lot of people helped Lucas a lot, and thank goodness, he didn't get completely lost in the weeds. We had so many friends who helped him considerably, and because I was struggling to function myself. I mean, losing my dad and another child, and Lucas and I had a lot of hugs and tears and lots of comedy. He wanted us to watch funny movies. I've seen every Will Ferrell movie about 3 times. He had his own way that he wanted to heal, but part of what he did, and it took him time to understand this, is he pushed it down, and it made him sick, and he became suicidal at the age of 13. And luckily he told a friend, and she told the school, and then we were informed. And then a year later, it happened again. And let me explain. Triggers for people are real. And his birthday was a trigger for him. He had like a sibling remorse that he shouldn't be having
his own birthday or Reed's birthday?
His own birthday.
Interesting. Okay.
He did not feel like, so Reed and Dad were murdered in April, and the whole year went around to March, and it was Lucas's birthday. And he just fell apart, that he just thought he shouldn't be living because Reed wasn't living. And he didn't think he was as good as Reed. He didn't think, Reed was great. Reed was good. And Lucas has walked into his own life, and become the same thing. I would say all the wonderful things about Lucas in just a different way about who he is than Reed was. But at 12, he just didn't think he could fill Reed's shoes. And because he thought he should, but he didn't need to. Anyway, he was suicidal 2 different times, and it was extremely serious. And we struggled. So the 3 of us lived in the house, and we all grieved. But we all were trying to heal differently. So I tell this story publicly, and I tell it in my book, that Lynn was healing through wine and friends. Red wine and friends. And I was healing through staying busy. I just kept really busy, and I kept creating things, and people would ask me to speak, and I'd say yes, and I was gone a lot, and I was just busy. And Lucas was angry. He was angry, and he was mostly angry at me. It seemed like I was a target. And he ate, and he became obese. He ate and ate and ate. And so a lot of care, professional care. So we had friends helping. We had professional care on several different occasions, and then we moved. We moved him out of Overland Park, Kansas, and just kind of plucked him out of that story that really wasn't his, and we moved him to Florida. And when he was a sophomore in high school, and he wanted to. This was him saying, "Please, let me do this." So we moved him to Florida, and then we followed him about 5 months later. We sold our house and we moved, and he flourished. He blossomed, he flourished, and he has become and got himself to be this amazing young man. He's 18, and he's a freshman at the University of Arkansas. Your listeners would get to know him much better if they listen to
I'm going to mention that for sure, because I have that as well, because his podcast was quite moving, and what's just, I've just learned it too, speaking about my own personal history with my parents and the Holocaust and stuff like that. Talking about it just helps in every way. I mean, communication, talking about it, sharing your experience with people is healing in so many different ways.
I agree with you, and that came natural to me. It does not come natural to Lynn, and it did not come natural to Lucas or many people. And for those of us who are talkers, we need to understand that other people need to process it differently. So Lucas processed it through art a little bit. He did some painting. He had this whole stint on painting. Then he went out one weekend and tried to build a treehouse. So he kind of processed it through hammering and nails, and and then he started processing it through golf and being on the golf course and hitting a little white ball, but being out there in nature. And so everyone really does have to find their path. Now he does now understand and is about talking it out and feeling it, because he did stuff it down, and he did not want me to say Reed's name for almost 2 years. And that was really hard for me, because I wanted to talk about Reed.
Wow.
So I just can't tell you how differently we were healing, and things that I did were hurting him. I was creating a conversation about their deaths. I was creating Faith Always Wins. I was creating this all the time. And he was like, he needed none of that. And we were circling around each other in the house. And so
it's interesting
for both of us to move.
It's interesting too, though, because my mother's Holocaust story, my mother didn't, she didn't want to talk about the war after the war. Never. She didn't want to really hear anything.
Right.
So it is the way people process
Everyone is different. So we all hurt. We all hurt. We just heal differently, and we need to be open to how different people, even in our own DNA or in our own homes, heal differently from us, and give everyone some grace and have conversations about that.
And we all heal at different time. You know, you might heal quicker than me. You know, we all heal at different periods of time. It's not, there's no set to healing.
Right. And it's bumpy. So, like Lynn doesn't, I would say, I don't know the last time that Lynn cried, and I don't mean that badly. That's not a knock on my husband, but he knows on certain days that I'm going to be crying. You know, I mean, I would just break down and cry. And first I get angry, and then I cry, and he knows when it's coming. And so, yeah, we still in ebb and flow. But then, you know, it might be Reed's birthday or something that will trigger me in a big way, and it'll trigger Lynn in a different way. And we just have to be aware and just give each other grace for how we're going to process it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about from the moment this happened that you knew God had a plan for you. The Jewish community of Kansas embraced you and your family as you were struggling to make sense of what happened. You thought you might be, you know, have some connection to Judaism. You even began to learn about, you know, my religion, philosophy, traditions, culture, and which amazed me, even considered converting. Can you talk about that whole journey?
Yes, so I didn't know that much about Judaism. I had some Jewish friends and Jewish clients, and so I knew a little bit, but I hadn't educated myself, and I felt very ignorant about Judaism. And on the one hand, this man murdered 3 people because of Judaism. So I really wanted to find out, is there something in Judaism that would make someone, you know, want to murder them? Why did that happen? And so I was kind of searching for that and finding none of that. Of course, I found none of that. I found the golden rule, and I found love, and I found, you know, love your neighbor, and I found leave our world a better place. And I just found all of these traditions and belief systems that were so similar to mine. And that's when I did think, wow, is God saying that I'm supposed to be Jewish? You know, because I felt so at home in the Jewish community, and I didn't convert. I don't think that I'm, quote, supposed to become Jewish. To me, would mean that I would have to think, and I would have to believe that Jesus wasn't born from the Virgin Mary, and that Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Right? That really is what separates Christianity from Judaism, is that core belief that Christians have about Jesus in particular. And I have such just this belief inside of me. I know that heaven exists, and I know that Jesus went through that is what I can't give up. That I love Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam. I learned then about Islam. And then what I realized, Alan, is it wasn't just Judaism that God wanted me to understand. God wanted me to understand all faiths. And that's when I just, by December of 14, I was like, okay, I'm supposed to know about Islam too. And at the time, Alan, all we heard about was ISIS. That's all we were hearing about. Mm-hmm. So when I started learning about Islam, I mean, you know, Lynn was very concerned. He was like, why are you wanting to know about this? And I said, I think God wants me to. And he's like, okay. So I just,
but was that after the young man was killed? The
yes.
Muslim young,
yes.
16-year-old, another young man, 16-year-old who was murdered because of his race.
Yeah, Abdus Samad Hussein was murdered in front of his siblings and a youth group. Oh. He was coming out of his own mosque prayer time and was run over, and it's graphic and horrible. And I was asked to come and be there with the students. Again, the students. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go be with the students. And I didn't know that they wanted me to speak. And I felt so concerned and worried and stupid and ignorant. I didn't know anything about Islam. And I literally asked this woman, I said, do you believe in heaven? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, I can talk about heaven. And so I got up there because I thought, I know about heaven. My dad and son are in heaven, and I feel so confident about heaven. And so that's what I talked about. And I thought, I didn't even know that we had that in common.
Hmm. And then you learned about all these religions and now with Faith Always Wins and 7 days bringing, banding together to fight evil. Can you talk about the combination of Faith Always Wins and Make a Ripple, Change the World?
Yes, so Faith Always Wins is the 501c3. So it's the parent organization. And then we put on an event, an experience called 7 Days, Make a Ripple, Change the World. And it's 7 days of activities. And our themes are love, discover, others, connect, you, go, onward. And every theme has its own experience. It's all virtual this year, so all of your listeners can join us from anywhere. So that's everything awesome. Will be virtual. But, my mom is the one who said, I think that the something good that should happen is that people should be kind to one another and do acts of kindness for 7 days in a row. And that is how we blossomed 7 days, Make a Ripple, Change the World. And it's just so much bigger than 7 days of kindness, but that is what we promote. We promote people to understand that we have so much more in common. Atheists, agnostics, Jews, Buddhists, Hindu, we don't hate. There's no hate in a religion. Religions don't promote hate. And I know a lot of people will think that maybe Islam in particular or another religion might promote hate, and maybe they'll look at the Bible and think that there's hate being promoted, but it's not. It's the underlying message is to love your neighbor and to care for your neighbor. That is
in every religion.
In every single religion, and so many people don't understand that, and so we continue just to keep educating people on that. And we pull in high school students to help us do it.
It's amazing. And what a tribute to Reed and your dad, truly. I love that Reed's dream of singing the national anthem came true, sadly, after he passed. But what was that like, hearing it at the Kansas City Royals New York Yankees game? It must have been just overwhelming.
It was amazing. Yeah. So the Kansas City Royals had never in the entire time of a game opening played the national anthem on the big screen, on the Jumbotron. They always had a live performance. And so Reed wasn't there to give a live performance, but we had a performance recorded that he had sung when he was at a prayer breakfast, or at a school district breakfast. It was at the Blue Valley Foundation breakfast, and he sang the national anthem in front of about 1,000 people, and we got it recorded then. And friends put that together. Friends reached out to friends, and they connected, and they said, June 7th, can you be at the Royals game? And they're going to play Reed's national anthem, and it was phenomenal.
That's great. And how old was he when he recorded that? Because I mean,
he was 14.
When he recorded it, he was 14. Still he performed in front of 1,000 people. My God, that's.
I know he was just becoming.
I don't think I would have gotten up in front of 1,000 people at the age of 14. I have to admit that.
Yeah, and it's super cute when he tries to hit the high note, and he's like, he does this little like, oh well, and then keeps singing. So it's sweet.
Well, ever since his passing, I know you talk about this a lot. You talk that you feel his presence and have witnessed many signs from him. Even when you just last week signed the deal for your book, Healing a Shattered Soul, a personal memoir, you had some signs then. Can you talk about the signs? And then, of course, I want to hear about the book.
Yes. So just so many messages came in within a week of their deaths. And the first animal that I saw that was a sign was the yellow butterfly. And I was out on the back porch crying and journaling. I was writing and journaling a lot. I just kept writing out all my anger and my fear and everything. And I looked up, and this little yellow butterfly was flying by. And the yellow butterfly has become such a symbol of REIT that I had it tattooed on my arm. So I have a yellow butterfly tattooed on my arm because, and then the scripture is Genesis 15:6, which is when
That's
Abraham.
beautiful.
Thank you. It's when Abraham found righteousness in God. So that was the first start of messages. Then it started with song. And I would be somewhere. For instance, I was going to the grocery store for the first time, probably to get milk or something. And a song that he and I liked was on in the car. And then when I got to the grocery store and was walking down the aisle, and again, this is like 6 a.m. because I'm up super early. And one of the songs that he sang was a Bruno Mars song, and he would sing that song, was on the radio as I was walking in. First time I'd gone to the grocery store since their death. So those things just kept happening. I mean, there are thousands, and I think that my next book, which I'm excited about, is going to be about messages. And then last week.
Nice. You're going to do another one.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
All about messages. I think that will be the next one. But last week, like you said, I signed a contract with Front Edge Publishing, and within minutes, I checked the weather app to go outside for a walk, and this message came up from the weather app about the tornado in Oklahoma on May 3rd, 1999. Do you see the weather app? Do you know those little messages that come up?
Not something in the past, but I usually get a warning for the future.
Right. That's what I think. It's usually like a definition about the cumulus clouds or where it rains the most or something.
Yeah. I mean, I get, there's a warning that says, tomorrow or something, not May 3rd, 1999.
That's what I'm saying. He was born May 21, 1999, and I was very pregnant with him. My hands are out in front of my belly right now. I was very pregnant with him, and I was watching the tornado. I was in Norman, Oklahoma, and the tornado was in Moore, and I could see an F5 tornado miles away. And my dad called, and he said, "Get your ass in the bathroom and cover up with the baby bed." So I did. I got in the bedroom, and I got this baby bed mattress, and I covered myself up in the bathtub. And so I signed this contract, tap the weather app, and it says the F5 tornado, May 3rd, 1999. It's not even May. I was like, that's why I said, I can't make this up, you guys. I cannot make this up. I get messages from him all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. Oh, I love the idea of the message book. And do you know when the book will come out, Healing a Shattered Soul?
April.
Great.
Yeah, we're on a fast track, so it's coming out.
Wow.
It's coming out in April. I told them it's the 7th year of 7 days. It's the 7th anniversary of their murders, and 777. So I want it to come out in April. So they're making that happen.
Oh, that's amazing. You also started, and we spoke of this earlier, your podcast, Real Grief, Real Healing, hearing from people about their life-altering experiences and what steps each person takes to find healing. And as you mentioned, Lucas recently did it with you. Talk about the podcast, but also what was it like? I mean, I loved listening to mother and son, talking, but it was really open and honest for Lucas. I mean, he talked of attempting to take his own life and his grief and
yeah, it was powerful. So it came to be, the podcast itself came to be. We moved Lucas to Florida, and then Lynn and I moved to Florida, and just within about a year, I met, it was in 2019, September of 19, a friend of mine from Kansas City flew to Orlando. And then that introduced me to the woman, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson, who had a podcast, and that's the channel I'm on. It's called Experience of the Soul. And I met Cynthia on this meeting when my friend Michelle came in, and she asked me, she said she does a lot of positive speaking and positive podcasts and meditation. And she said she really felt like her channel wasn't balanced. And she knew that I'd been public speaking about grief and healing. And she wanted to know if I would be willing to, kind of talk about grief. And I was like, wow, I can talk about grief, but I just think that's such a downer to talk about just grief. Like, ugh, who wants to just hear about all this sad stuff? Because that sucks. And it's real. But I said, can I uplift people in the end too? And she said, absolutely. So I listened to a lot of podcasts for about a month or two. I just really poured them all in, and I listened to different kinds. And I decided that there are some things that I do feel like I want to share about myself and our family and my life. And so I distribute 2 a month, and one is just me talking about kind of whatever I feel like I should be talking about at the time. And it always has to do with a grief event of mine or past or something, and then healing, and then what I did. And sometimes it's funny, and I, talk about funny things that happened in our family. And then the other one, like you said, is I interview someone who has had a grief event, and they are not all death. They're all not death related. I interviewed a man from Kansas City named Wesley Hamilton who was shot and paralyzed. And I also interviewed the mother of a daughter who was hit by a tree and huge brain, trauma injury, but she is living and functioning and all that. So, but they had a grief event because I don't have the market on how to heal.
Right.
There's all kinds of ways to heal. And so I want to interview people that have had a grief event, and I want to hear what do they do or not do, because like we've said several times, everyone heals differently. And I want people to hear how normal it is to hurt and how normal it is to be fearful, to find joy again, and then how people do end up finding it at some point. So that's what I share.
Well, and I highly recommend everybody checking the podcast out, and especially listening, to Lucas, because I think it's really powerful. I mean, he's still, how old is he's 18 now?
18. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah.
Well, you know what, Alan? He had never shared that much information, certainly publicly. And I had let him know before he came here for Thanksgiving. I said, I'm waiting to record my podcast because I would like to interview you for my podcast. And he just kind of maybe blew it off and said, okay. Well, then the day before, I'm like, it's tomorrow. And I just want you to talk about whatever you want to talk about. I won't pressure you. I'm going to ask you an open-ended question and you answer however you want to. And you heard it. He just takes off. And I tend to not want to interrupt my guests. It bothers me when somebody, you ask them this question and they really feel like they need to pour out, especially because I'm talking about a painful moment. Mm-hmm. And I just let him pour out. And then he leads me by doing that through the rest of the conversation. So it's definitely about a mother's love for her children, which is me. It's my love for my child so much that I moved him to another state. I left where I lived, and he really needed to be away from me for a period of time and all the craziness I was creating. And we're both better off for that time.
And that's how it worked for you. It may not be the same for others, like you said, but even just sharing that could help somebody else figure that out, or figure, just being open to another solution that they may not have thought of, but you just might have enlightened them to by sharing your story. So, I really do. As hard as it, I'm sure, is for you at times, it is still incredibly powerful. And I think, I'm grateful that you do it and help others. We started this and I started conversations with Alan about Charlottesville. Do you remember your thoughts when you saw that happen and heard about it? And
yes, I thought, oh my God, there they are. And they're in living color, and there are a lot of them, because I think I was pretty clear that when the shooter murdered Reet and Dad and Terry, he was a lone wolf. He was by himself. And then now they've multiplied and they've, just all showed up together. And I thought, how is this even happening? Why are we as American citizens, letting them spew all this hate, because I know from experience that if you let people spew their hate, at some point someone's going to blow up. You know, not everybody has the mental capacity to understand when to stop.
Mm-hmm.
There is a point at which there are people who don't have the mental capacity and know when to stop. So for instance, the shooter in our murders, in my dad and Reed and Terry's murder, used a man to buy a gun. It was a straw purchase. And the man he used was not mentally competent. I've never met him. I couldn't even tell you his name right now. But from what I have heard is that he, is an adult man, but his mental capacity is lower. And he was manipulated and used. And so when I saw all those people, I'm not at all saying that all those people are mentally incompetent, but what is happening is that if they have this powerful voice and this leadership, they are speaking into someone who doesn't know when to stop. And that is who drove the car and murdered Heather Heyer, the person who didn't know when to stop. And that's what is so frightening for people like me and Susan Bro and Chris Winchuk and people, moms and dads who have lost children to hate, because we know that someone in the audience won't know when to stop.
Well, and I think we, witnessed that on January 6th at our nation's capital. Thousands didn't know when to stop.
Right.
They barreled through the doors, and you share a very poignant blog post, which will be up on my YouTube page. But again, seeing those events unfold, what went through your mind?
That they were led there, that they believed, as humans, we want to grasp at and find, who is leading us and is it the right way? And we all search for that in some form or fashion. But when you are only around the people, when you are around people that are saying the exact same thing as you all the time, you got to start thinking, well, what about these people over here? And what about those people over there? And you've got to take in other voices. And I just feel like they were kind of led to the slaughter. They were just these lambs that just said, oh, we were told that if we go here, that we'll be able to reverse the election. And they believed it. And so they got there. And I don't think that of all the people that were there, that all of them were planning on storming anything. I don't think that.
I agree. I don't think they fully grasped what was about to happen.
Right. And then there were a few that became the catalyst, and they rallied people up, and they, got all people riled up, and they started storming. And then sometimes you just get caught up in it, and you're like, "Ooh, now I'm caught up in it." But that was a huge mistake. That was against the law, and a huge mistake. And now those people, I'm glad, are paying the price for it personally.
Because me too.
Yeah, they were trying to say that they can overrun our democracy, which you can't. You can't. And I feel confident. I do feel confident in the United States, and that we as a nation do protect one another, typically do protect one another, and we will certainly protect our democracy.
And those images were just, I think of my parents. So I thought of my parents hearing those words in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us. Couldn't imagine, like 70 years after the war. And then to see these T-shirts on Americans was really mind-blowing, 2 weeks ago. Mind-blowing to me. The hatred.
They had on Auschwitz shirts, and then they also had on, what is embarrassing also and horrific for a Christian, is that they had on, I love Jesus shirts. Well,
Yeah.
So what I heard from someone was that, okay, well, Jesus went into the temple and threw all the tables and, and didn't want the tax, the money changers. He was mad about all the people trying to make money. But Jesus loved the sinners. Jesus loved, Jesus always said, love first, love your neighbor. Well, the rally cry and breaking into the Capitol and looting the Capitol is not loving your neighbor. It's not trying to understand one another. And so my post was about, we do need to listen to one another because why do they think that way? And why do I think the way I do? And you don't know that unless you have a live conversation like we're having. You can't hide behind social media and think that you're going to understand someone. Just in text messages, with your family, don't you sometimes go,
totally. What did you mean?
This is someone that you maybe know or live with, and you're like, what? And so can you imagine? We really don't know what people are trying to say in social media, and it takes live conversations, and that's what we're hoping, that's what I'm hoping will continue to happen.
Amen to that. And you can tell from what, Charlottesville and the Capitol, people are hurting, but that neither way is the right way to express that you are hurting. That's where they've taken it too far.
Right.
And that's my hope with this show. Even if one person has a different thought, because we've just had a conversation about all these things. And like you said, people who you shared that, a white supremacist killed them because he thought they were Jewish. You were like, they didn't think that could really happen.
Yes. Yeah. People say that to me. They're like, that still happens. I'm like, I've just told you it happened. I just told you I'm living this life now. Everything I do, Alan, everything I have done has been because of that. The trajectory in my life changed just a 180. And I'll bring up my brother, Will, his podcast, because he said, I interviewed my mom and my older brother and my younger brother and an aunt along the year last year. And my brother said, we were heading north and we got pushed off course and now we're heading east. And he said, sometimes there are good things east and we just are going east now and we got to find out what's good going east. And I really value that. We're a very pragmatic family because my dad was so pragmatic, and it just kind of is that way. Like, we're going east, so what are we going to make of it going east? And so that's where I come from. It doesn't mean that I don't get angry. It doesn't mean that I don't get really pissed off. It doesn't mean that I don't cry. But you know what? I can't get them back. I cannot get them back. So now I'm going to live my life for the better, to celebrate their legacies and, my own and my husband and my son and my mom and our family. And we're going to continue to make good things happen. We're going to continue to listen to people's stories and try to help as much as we can heal the world.
I think I said to you I was going to read what your brother Will said at the funeral, but there's no need because you really said it beautifully there, Mindy. I'm going to go and listen to your brother's podcast, but it means so much to me that you spent time here. You really are an inspiration to me, and I really do believe you are changing the world by opening up, sharing your story, sharing Reet and your dad with the world and your faith with all of us. I'm not a Christian or Catholic. I'm Jewish. I didn't grow up very religious, but I do have faith. I believe, hate doesn't belong in this world. And I think we all need, as you say, please be kinder and more courageous every day.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so proud of you too, that you called me in October and here we are now. And I think it's awesome that you are being vulnerable and brave all at the same time in sharing your story with your followers and anyone else who wants to hear it. I think it's fantastic.
And that's the point. Anyone else who wants to hear it. And I will be following up on Susan Bro and Christian because I would love to, just learn more, because I do think I want to understand. I don't believe the hate, we have to remove hate. We may disagree and we could be vocal about those disagreements, but the rest doesn't belong. Mindy, stay well. I can't wait for the book.
Thank you. Me too.
I will talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. More to come on Conversations with Alan. Have a great night, everybody.